Too kind. Thank you very much. So, excellent segue in that the Internet of Things has been exceptionally well defined, which is great. I appreciate that very much. And both of the previous speakers have talked about predictive technologies and the importance of those and data sharing across platforms. Perfect segue into talking today about some solar forecasting. So when I talk about solar forecasting, I'm not talking about network load forecasting 3 months from now, a year from now. I'm talking what's going to happen in the next 10 minutes with your PV system. And how can we take that information and use it to integrate into our grid more solar and more storage. So today we're talking about solar forecasting support for Australian energy networks and markets through a thing called the Solcast API. And I'll explain what that means to you in just a few slides. First, I want to get something very clear. I have two roles. Oops, I hit the slide too fast. I have two roles. In one role, I am a lecturer at the Australian National University, where I teach courses and run a research project in solar forecasting. And one of the things that I've seen that is incredibly important for university R&D is getting it out of the walls of the university and out into the real world. And so the reason that I have for founding Solcast is precisely that. Solcast is a solar forecasting and modeling company that is taking some of the IP that we're developing in the university in the solar forecasting space and getting it out into operations. So this is a really important way for us to commercialize university research outcomes. At the same time, Solcast is its own complete standalone company, building its own products, networking with its own customers. So it's a bit of a complicated relationship, but it's something that I'm learning to navigate and seeing as what I think really the future of what our universities could do if they put their mind to it. I really enjoy taking the chance at each of my talks at a conference to briefly revisit what I've seen from some of the other talks. And this year at Solar 2017, I see this real on-the-cusp thing that John Grimes mentioned in his first talk. We are actually at the peak that we've all been waiting for and about to go over the cusp into this brave new world of integrating high penetrations of solar and storage. It's an incredibly exciting time. And for each person sitting here, I know it's after lunch, you've sat through lots of talks, you might feel a little bit down, but you should feel excited and privileged to be a part of something that's really actually going to be leading the world. And if you can't tell, it's something I really think is pretty awesome. We see revived leadership from the energy market operator. Our new CEO, Audrey Zabelman, was speaking at the opening of this conference, and the change in tone from the energy market operator has been nearly instantaneous. We see them talking about innovation, working with new companies, figuring out how to confront these challenges. At the same time, we've seen a technology energy roadmap come out from Energy Networks Australia, led by CEO John Bradley, that really lays out a vision that I think if we can work together behind, really will see us through to integrating all these new technologies into our electricity system. One of the other things that's happened is just at the launch of this conference, I'm sure he did this on purpose, our Energy and Environment Minister, Josh Frydenberg, actually called renewables and this transformation unstoppable. So maybe he finally got it. Maybe he finally sees what the rest of us see, and that this is the future, and is starting to get excited about it. And one of the other things I thought that was really telling was in the talk from Bloomberg New Energy Finance at the beginning of this conference, Kobad there talked about solar being in a realm of competitiveness that was not previously thought possible. That's a really strong statement coming from the leading energy analyst in this space. So the challenge that we see is that rooftop solar in Australia is going, what I say, gangbusters. It's going crazy again. Not only do we have world-leading penetration levels to start with at our 6 gigawatts of solar, but we're looking at adding equal to that, 5 gigawatts more solar in the next 3 to 4 years. That is a very, very strong growth signal, and that will take us beyond the realms that we've seen anywhere else in the world. And with that, we will see 3 to 4 gigawatts of large solar farms operating in our energy markets as well, connected through our distribution and our transmission networks, giving us challenges that we've not yet had to see or know completely how to confront. And so with us heading to 35, 45% solar rooftop penetration levels, we're in for some exciting times. Some data here from the APVI Live Solar Map. You got to check it out if you haven't seen it. They do great work. So we're venturing into unprecedented territory with solar and storage. And with that, that comes with really significant challenge for both our markets and our networks. And really, actually, I see the forefront of this challenge being in our low voltage networks where these storage and solar systems are being installed. How do we manage the fact that we have this extended radial network that is used to working in one direction? We've heard that narrative before, energy to flow from centralized generators out to users. Now we're looking at a situation where we have solar and storage that's going to be operated by many different parties in a very potentially chaotic and challenging way. This is why the low voltage networks will be the forefront of this discussion. How do we manage the high penetrations of solar and energy storage in a way that makes this work and doesn't cause us problems that put the brakes on this thing? This is going to be a very challenging thing for us to figure out, and it will take a lot of coordination. I wish I would have changed this word in time. I want to use the word orchestration, because that's what John Bradley did in his talk earlier today, orchestrating all of this new stuff coming into the grid and doing it in an intelligent fashion. So rooftop solar, I see, has two key challenges for our energy markets and our energy networks. And the first one is a lack of visibility. Many people here would probably already understand, but many of you might also not, that our solar systems that are installed, the 6 gigawatts of solar that we have out there, the equivalent of, what would that be, around 12 coal-fired power plants if the sun's shining brightly operating, we do not have active feedback from those PV systems. We do not know their current power output. We do not know their historical interval power output. We do not know their future power output. Yet we are required to integrate them into our electricity markets and networks. This is a fundamental challenge. And that lack of visibility comes from a few sources that I'll address in an upcoming slide. And the second one is fast-moving, fast-changing cloud cover. And I have one example here, one of many examples that I've identified with my research team, where we have convective cloud cover showing up, big thunderstorms showing up in New South Wales back in February, on the 17th of February. They aren't there, and then they are. They blow up. These convective towers show up in 30 to 60 minutes, and they can have very widespread anvil cloud tops. And as you'd understand, when a cloud shows up and moves over you and it's a thunderstorm, it gets pretty dark. So we'll see our solar PV systems go from 100% generation in terms of their capacity down to 20%, 10% in a matter of 30 to 60 minutes over large-scale regions. And this is just one example here where we have 800 megawatts of solar generation just before noon. A few hours later, 200 megawatts of solar generation across the New South Wales DFS zone and the energy market. That's a big challenge. That is not something that is completely okay if we're going to run our network off of twice as much solar. So we need to be able to coordinate, orchestrate that storage and demand-side management and other technologies like wind energy and hydro to offset these challenges. But how are we going to do that? The key thing is we need to know that's going to happen ahead of time. In confronting this challenge, I've put together a research project that is backed by the Australian Renewable Energy Agency and is led by the ANU. We're deploying operational solar PV forecasting for several distribution networks across Australia and working with them, and doing staged commercialization of the IP from that project into Solcast. So each year, new technology is hitting the markets and actually working with these energy markets and networks, as I've discussed, in these challenging areas. Even having some back and forth about what they need, we can build it, get it out there, solve these problems. So I want to make it very clear, we can use research projects, university-driven research projects, to actually do stuff if we frame it right and we work hard. And that is something that I see as being very important for confronting these challenges. Our objective is not a small one. I want to see us demonstrably raise the penetration levels of solar in our distribution networks. That is a key challenge we have now. We've talked about some standard changes with 4777, saying that we can only install up to 5 kVA of solar in certain parts of these networks unless there's approvals. So we're already seeing some concern about where these penetration levels are going to go. I want to see us confront that with these new technologies, solar, storage, and the like, to raise those penetration levels so we're not saying to anybody, no, you can't have solar on your roof. This needs to be democratized. It needs to be something that each and every one of us can take advantage of. So problem number one, let's go back to these two problems. The first problem is a lack of visibility. And the real challenge here is there's not actually good data sets about distributed small-scale solar that are out there that are freely available. There's some great postcode level data from the Clean Energy Regulator that's then put out there in better refined form by APVI, but really that does not map back to our network. So what this project has done is we have partnered with 11 distribution networks in Australia, 11 of the 14 distribution networks, to figure out the exact characteristics and locations of the small-scale PV systems installed across Australia. Once we know that, we also have them group that PV metadata, we call it, by their networks. So we know where these PV systems are, we know which distribution transformers they're connected to, which low voltage network assets and zone substations they're connected to, and all the way back up to the transmission network level. So this is just a little schematic showing what we do. We're able to figure out where the PV systems are, what they're attached to in terms of the rest of the network, and this is a very simplified diagram that's just meant to be kind of elementary as an example. It gets much more complicated than this. But what this starts to allow us to do is generate predictive technologies that tell us not just what's going to happen with an individual solar system or a large-scale energy market zone, but being able to say there will be this much solar variability on this given distribution transformer at this time with this probability. That type of information is what's going to enable solutions. We want to be enabling things like energy storage to offset these variability challenges. The other problem with the lack of visibility is there's a real unavailability of what's actually happening in real time with solar PV systems. So what I've done with this project is I've partnered with two key partners, SMA and Fronius, which are in the spirit of Internet of Things, connecting thousands of internet-connected inverter systems every month. So if you have an internet-connected Fronius or SMA inverter, congratulations, you're part of this research project. Don't worry, I don't know exactly where you live. But one of the things we do with this is we take this data in, we quality control it, we see which PV systems are erroneous, we can determine where they're pointed, we can determine if they're dirty, if they're performing poorly, and we can turn them into smart data points once we've done that. And so by doing that, we can get real-time feedback on what PV systems are actually doing, and we can do something very, very cool with the next tool that we introduce, which is cross-validate our solar forecasts, which are produced by a satellite system. So here in Australia, we are actually covered by a new satellite called Himawari 8. It was put up by the Japanese Meteorological Agency about 18 months ago, and we've been working since it went live with this data. And on the left here, you see an example of a forecast that will animate, just showing some of what we can do with this. This satellite images clouds at 1 kilometer resolution every 10 minutes. This is a complete new generation of satellites that has not previously been available before and is enabling us to simulate PV system power output and forecast that power output down to the single individual household level, down to that low voltage network. The very, very exciting thing about this technology is that this satellite also covers Japan, Southeast Asia, parts of China, Eastern India, Indonesia. So the technologies we develop here in Australia as we move forward into this next generation of electricity network operations will be something that we can take and help out the rest of the world with. Very exciting times. So on the left here, I just show you an example of the forecast in motion, but on the right is some of the imagery from that satellite that we've used to turn into cloud opacity measurements. So what we actually do is we see where clouds are, we look at their motion, we can forecast where they'll be in the future, and we can also determine with relatively good confidence how thick those clouds are. And that comes down to some fancy radiation modeling, which is where what I did my PhD in, really banged my head against those atmospheric radiation models. Not very fun, but very useful when you get done. The very cool thing about this forecasting system is that I really see a very important part of this being an enablement strategy. So what we've done is we've made these forecasts exceptionally easy to access. You can go to our website and sign up for this right now and be downloading solar forecasts for any location in the world within minutes. This means that you can build enabling technology on top of this API. It can be a real-time system, it functions operationally, has multiple redundancy zones, it's reliable, it's there for you, and it can even do simplified PV power output measurements. You can also look back at the last 7 days. And so this is something that is built in that spirit of being able to build other technologies on top of this system. What we're doing with this API framework goes much beyond just producing solar forecasts for individual PV systems or at a given location. We're actually building an API service that will be servicing back to these distribution networks that allows the solar forecast to be seen down into the LV network. So we're building a system that uses this forecasting product I've talked about, uses the metadata from the PV systems I've talked about, and organizes the solar forecast by the distribution network, and then makes that available back to the DNSPs, so that they can actually look into this API, throw through an identifier for a zone substation or a feeder line, and figure out what solar is doing right now, what it's likely to do in the future, and what it's done in the past. This is a key part of enabling these DNSPs to adjust their planning and operational scenarios to deal with more solar intermittency. So where we're at right now is taking some data, the example here on the left from Ergon's network, substations all down in the distribution transformer network level, our satellite forecasting system, which is in the center, and here is some initial output from that API at a zone substation for Essential Energy as an example. We're almost there. We're going to have this product ready for testing for them by the middle of this year and hopefully exposing that to more developers and researchers beyond that. So we're getting there, and I hope that we can give you some really good substantive things that we've accomplished with this API service coming up in Solar Storage 2018. So this is a video of some of this work we're doing right now, and in fact, this demo for South Australia is up on our webpage at solcast.com.au. We actually are showing a mapping of the rooftop solar around South Australia, in the suburbs surrounding Adelaide, and showing you the live forecast of all the solar power output from those PV systems by transmission connection point. And so we've built this tool because we see South Australia as the forefront of some of these key challenges. And we've seen a number of talks, including those from Sunverge on this topic with virtual power plants and some of the amazing things that are happening and some of the battery storage and energy storage technologies that we'll see showing up through their latest funding schemes and EOIs for integrating storage into this grid will hopefully be something we can work with this solar forecasting system. So where do we go to next? What is next? And I'm almost done for the card waiver in the front. As I've traveled around, I've had the privilege of visiting with 9 of these DNSPs in person and having some detailed workshopping on what we can do to help them accommodate more solar into the grid. And the number one question they ask me is, okay, this is great, but there's only so much we can do. What can we do about this? We don't have a lot of flexibility. We only have so many knobs we can turn. We can have operational scenarios and long-term planning that use this tool, but when it comes down to doing this in real time, there's actually not that much distribution networks can do. But thankfully, I see that there are 3 key fixes. Storage, charging and dispatch of storage or batteries, smart inverters, which can help us do with frequency and voltage control, and demand-side management. We can reduce load in key areas or increase load in key areas to deal with problems in voltage. But my view is that we must coordinate, we must orchestrate these technologies. And how should we do that? I believe that the key variable for deciding how to use these various technologies and when to use them is actually dependent on the sunshine. And my argument for that will go back to those penetration levels we're talking about earlier. 6 gigawatts of rooftop solar, add 6 more, add 4 gigawatts of solar farms. That's only 2020. That growth will continue. We're going to see the number one variable that determines supply and demand in our energy markets and the behavior of storage technologies and demand-side management technologies. It's going to be connected back to the sun. How brightly is the sun shining, where and when? And don't worry, Solcast has your back, because we're going to make it very easy for you to know that information. The big question is who's going to provide these services and these fixes in real time? Who's going to orchestrate that? I think that's an open question that we need to sort through. I know there's a lot of different players who'd like to be that, but I think that's the exciting thing that we're going to go ahead and figure out. I'll leave you with this last slide, just saying a big thank you to the Australian Solar Council. One of the only reasons I'm standing in front of you here today with this cool research project and this startup company is because Steve Bloom came along and said, Nick, you're doing good work. Go out there and work with industry and get some stuff done. And that kind of mentorship is something that I would encourage many people in this audience to make sure you're doing for the other young people around you. So thank you very much for your time. I look forward to your questions.